For things like planned quantity change, probably as expected, but unforeseen conditions, stuff still happens, regardless of the delivery method. The key is how you set that up in the contract to address those unforeseen conditions. With design build, that's a challenge. And fairly setting up the RFP to share that risk. What happens if we get into a hazardous waste site during the delivery of the project? Who bears that risk under design build? Who should bear that risk? Do you want to push that risk off on the industry, all the risk for the project? Probably not. You're going to end up paying for it. But if you have a contract provision that tries to fairly anticipate those things, and if there's a hazmat condition, the owner may want to take that risk in advance and tell the industry they're going to take that risk. But if there's something like a geotechnical risk where they're asking design build teams to take borings in advance or share the risk for differing geotechnical differences, maybe you want to split that risk with the industry. But once again, if you want it, put it in the contract, describe it in the RFP, how you're going to share that risk. Different agencies have done that with differing site conditions, and they set up a contingency pools or other ways of sharing risk, and they've made it clear to the proposers how they're going to evaluate changes in conditions and who's going to bear that risk. But the key is setting up a process in the RFP that recognizes that. Questions or comments on that? Yes, sir.
I have a question. These delivery methods, just in my head, I can't kind of wrap my brain around the risk part of this, because kind of areas that I pay most attention to environmental and kind of liability and force, people work pretty hard to do 50/50 with the contractor and the owner. So is the risk just money and time, or is it something else? Because the owner is inherently some of it. So how does that balance, and what's the definition of risk in these terms?
It's all of that, and it's the global risk of the project, and then the risk that the industry has to accept when they enter into this contract for their design liability. And the owner should be looking at all these risks globally as you start the project development process, and at least accepting that we're going to keep that risk, and that's most appropriately bared by the owner, or we're going to try to share or divert some of that risk to the design build teams. But you need to go through that analysis early in the project development process and procurement planning, exactly how that risk will be shared or allocated. It's not always clear though, and it sometimes doesn't come to light till that unknown comes up.
We'll talk about tomorrow in great detail is what do you decide as far as risk assessment to put into the RFP, and what do you decide to leave for the contractor as far as risk. So when we break out tomorrow and talk about a specific project, we'll analyze that in detail with all of the different functional areas to come up with an RFP that benefits the project, both from an owner's perspective and from a builder's perspective as well. So that's something that we'll address is risk management. That's very key in looking at alternative delivery projects, is where you assign the risk.
I'd like to add something to that too. Commissioner hit on this yesterday for any of y'all that were in the room. Risk is not something we should just be looking at for alternative delivery projects. So the majority, as I mentioned, for design build 5 projects a year. So the majority of our work is still going to be a traditional design bid build environment. Risk is just as important there. The way we do business and have done it for a long time, we assume a lot of that risk with our plans. Please remember that when you put a set of plans together, that depending on how you structure it, you need to be thinking about risk. Are you putting an undue amount of risk on us or the contractor? You can see by these numbers that the impact of cost, or the impact on cost, is very real in a design bid build environment as well. So that's another key point to take away from this, is not just with alternative delivery, it's with Every job that we do, you need to be thinking about what are the risk areas, because it translates directly to dollars. They may not get it on the front end, but if there's a way to get it, they're going to get it. The numbers and research shows that.
Alrighty. Wrapping up with this research project, and if you have time, and when this research project is finally published, Federal Highway and NCHRP are great with initiating research. We're not so good at completing and publishing the research in a timely manner sometimes, but this is yet to be published. Hopefully it will before the end of the year on our Turner Fairbanks site. But one product of this research is a collection of lessons learned from all these case studies. And there are some really interesting case studies on CMGC and ATCs and design build, confidentiality, just a number of short 10 to 15 page papers that summarize the lessons learned from the research and using some of these alternative contracting techniques. So if you're interested in the subject, that is a great short collection of papers on specific targeted subjects that apply to these topics. I would encourage you to take a look at that if you're interested.